What is The Searchers? The Searchers is a film about a racist. It is perhaps not Ethan Edwards' sole defining characteristic, although his prejudice is this storyline's gravity. The Searchers is considerably controversial, because not only is this a film with a racially bigoted protagonist, but the question has been raised as to whether the film itself could be seen as racially insensitive. Hollywood westerns that were racially insensitive are innumerable. The American mythos of the Wild West can be seen as being rooted, originating in, a deeply racist and supremacist belief system, a time and place inseparable from, enabled by, genocidal actions carried out against the Native American population. For worse or better, John Ford agrees. The Searchers not only embodies the spirit of the Western genre on film, it embodies the soul of America itself, ugliness and all. It might still be warranted to refer to this film or aspects of this film as racist, although I think it is worthwhile at least to put this film's artistic intentions in context, whilst not precluding the film from manifestations of certain insensitivities or prejudices. The Searchers is also considered one of the very greatest films of all time, from America or any other country. Is one able to reconcile these two things? That is up to an individual, ultimately. The Searchers, I think, is one of the most powerful films of all time. Its technical merits are undeniable. Winton Hock's cinematography was explicitly cited by David Lean as a precedent for his own Lawrence of Arabia. The music, provided by Max Steiner, is superlative, its general direction perhaps, certainly amongst, Ford's very finest, and it's a film which also, at moments within the runtime, posits a potent philosophy of creative, considered, hypothetically storyboarded film editing. But then narratively, a film which motivated Godard to invoke Homer's Odyssey, but also one which Roger Ebert described as rather two films. His analogy is to invoke the tonal garishness of certain narrative moments, segments involving humour primarily, in an otherwise titanic behemoth of utter emotional anguish. It has to be said, my initial impression of The Searchers, when I first viewed it, I would have been maybe 15 or 16 at this time, was that its humour severely detracted from the potential brilliance of everything else. I found it off-putting, but now I sincerely choose to ignore it because the film's strengths do monumentally outweigh that. I think that this film is relentlessly evocative, one of the most considered ever made up to that point in history, and still one of the most immaculately composed, artistically ambitious, and just overwhelmingly filmic pictures of all time. As the grown-up Debbie trots down the hill, side by side passing back and forth between the figures of Ethan Edwards and Martin Pauly, Max Steiner's score creeps in. This is as good as the medium had ever been. And then our image of Wayne's reaction, the reverse shot, is not as euphorically wholesome. When we return to him a second time, he whips out his gun. I tear up just thinking about it. They finally found her. Nay, she finds them, she remembers home, Martin is elated. But we realize that Ethan may not have ever had the exact same intentions as Martin here. What is Ethan Edwards thinking at any point in this narrative? This has become the substance of discussions appraising The Searchers. Ethan Edwards is a more interesting creation than any character in literature. I love Mr. Toad, and no offense to Kenneth Grahame, but literature simply hasn't the ability to depict a scene wherein we truly do not know whether Edwards intends to strangle Debbie or lift her up in his arms. The fact is, I believe the implication is, Edwards doesn't truly know either, until he doesn't, whether he would kill her or not. The moment arrives, he lifts her in his arms and tells her everything is going to be okay. And then, at the end, he walks away from her. He knows his time has passed. He is a vestige of the past, a man defined by a cycle of violence between white settlers and indigenous natives. Ethan Edwards does what he can to enable a certain happiness for those younger than him, with more hope of redeeming America than he still has, and then chooses to leave it alone. It is time for a new era of Americans to define the nation, not men like Ethan Edwards, and Edwards wants it no other way. It's a beautiful film about an evil man, a racist, a Confederate sympathizer, an unprincipled killer who is happy to shoot a man while he's down, and a man who finds a way to redeem himself. A man whose love for his niece, possibly his biological daughter, inspires him to commit to great violence and hatred, summoning the bitter depths of his prejudicial cruelty. And yet, from the despair of such depravity, Edwards eventually emerges as a man who is more emotionally complex than even he realizes. Let's go home, Debbie. But what is home? The controversy of home is the basis of almost all of the violence which occurred on American soil, from the brutality against the natives, the revolution for independence, or the attempted redefinition which enabled the Civil War itself. The Searchers attempts to find the redeeming qualities of the American experiment, and if one of these things must be a bigoted man choosing to rescue and recover, and still feel a tremendous love for, a family member he might see as tarnished or impure, it's a sad situation, although this recovery arc has to start somewhere. The Searchers might not be about America itself, so much as it is about Ethan Edwards. Now, is Ethan Edwards an encapsulation, a byproduct of, a manifestation of, the American experiment? Is Ethan Edwards an inevitable example of an American? He is certainly a character we can look at and determine is formed by his circumstances and history. Why is Ethan Edwards the way he is? Because American history up to that point was what it was. Ethan Edwards is not a ground-up series of decision-making. Ethan Edwards was a blank piece of dough flattened by the rolling pin of North American history. So insofar as Ethan Edwards, at one time at least, encapsulates the soul of America, and insofar as The Searchers attempts to bear onto us the soul of Ethan Edwards, The Searchers can be said to be the film which, certainly in the context of the 19th century, although it absolutely holds relevance past that and past 1956 itself, most defines the American experiment itself.